Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Irish Mags Show and to what is our first ever live episode as we get together for an Irish Mags Tune Transfer Talk special. I managed to say that without messing it up. My name is Paul. I will be your host for today, and joining me are my talented co-hosts. There's that word talented again, boys. I don't know how that keeps getting in there. We have Mr. Alan Williamson and Mr. Chris O'Martin. Say hello, lads.
How's it going, lads? How are you?
How you doing? Nice to see you.
No catchphrase this week, Chris Show.
No, I'm very serious this time. Very serious this episode.
He's taking notes. He has the highlighter marker out and all. He has all my old tweets printed off. He's going to say, "You mother." I put X amount on Phillips to sign.
Plenty of that to come, lads. Give it time. Obviously, we have another voice here because I'm also delighted to welcome our special guest for this week's show. It's a man who is synonymous with Newcastle United transfer rumours and is, of course, a member of our Irish Mags community, albeit the Cork contingent, but we won't hold that against him just yet. Welcome to the Irish Mags Show, Mr. Sean Casey, or should I say Mr. Fabrizio Casey, judging by what's on our screen.
I appreciate the invite.
You're very welcome this week, Sean.
And I do apologize. I do apologize for the abuse that will follow. But again, take my model, thick skin.
Sean, don't worry. There's two lads here from Dublin. They're well used to abuse, and rightly so. Right. For anyone who's joining us for the first time, the Irish Mags are a passionate group of over 400 Irish Newcastle United fans from all over Ireland and beyond, with community at the heart of everything that we do. And we provide you with honest, fan-centric NUFC content, including community events, match reviews, previews, support with tickets and travel, transfer and development news, and more to come shortly. And of course, in-depth interviews with guests that we have on the show. This Irish Mag Show is a weekly podcast. It's available on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, and of course, wherever you get your podcasts. And all of the links to all of our socials are somewhere down there, buried in descriptions and below the Twitch screen or on YouTube, wherever you are watching. And this week's episode will be uploaded during the week. Right, Sean. How are you doing, sir? We're going to start with you, of course. Seeing as you're here, we've got to put you under the microscope, especially the time of year that's in it. But before we dive into all the transfer talk, Sean, I think just in case any of our listeners are not aware of who you are and what you're doing here, maybe if you could just tell us, I suppose, who you are, how you came to be, I suppose, all things Newcastle United. And really would love to hear how much you enjoy all the abuse that comes every time you tweet something transfer related about Newcastle.
Do you know what? The funny thing about it is I've posted about transfers and stuff like that for a while. You know, link originally came from somebody who used to get tickets off when I was younger. So I started traveling over to Newcastle when I suppose I started my trade when I was 16. So started getting proper money in. So I started to travel over and stuff like that. Made a contact for tickets, and for years, you know, like traveling over and back. And when the talks about the club being sold started kicking off, and I suppose when the PIF group and Amanda Staveley and stuff like that, when they started getting seriously involved about wanting to invest in the club, believe it or not, the person I used to get the tickets off had a very close contact to that group, and that's how I started getting information from there. So I started putting stuff out on Twitter and stuff like that as I was hearing it, sharing what I could share, you know. And Ben from Toon Mouth Tyne there, he retweeted one of my tweets, and he was like, I think he like grabbed about 4 of the tweets, and he was like, "Who's this fella?" Basically, the last 4 things he said have come off, you know, 100%. Like, so actually at the time I was kind of on my way down. We were going climbing Caron Tool, and I left the phone in the car, came back down, and I was like, I went from about 110 followers to like 3,000 in the space of about 6 hours. Like, I was like, what's going on here? And I kind of grew from that. So then I kind of started sharing information, just what I hear, you know. I don't ask anybody to believe me, you know. You don't have to follow me. You know, why you get so wound up by my tweets is mad. Like, you know, it's kind of like, I find it hilarious, like, you know, because people say you're being trolled, and I'm like, I don't see it that way. You know, it's my Twitter account, it's words on a screen, and you're shouting at some handsome fella on a Greek island in a picture, like, you know. Like, it's
if you
weird,
say so yourself.
you know, like, it's like knocking at someone's door and saying, I don't like what you have on the TV, will you turn it off? You know, like, it's of absolute no relevance to them. You can scroll past if you want to. You know, like, I've had somebody recently, like, I've been in DMs room for about 3 years, I'd say, you know, back and forth. They block me, they quote my tweets and call me out. Like, if you had a problem with me, just say it in my DMs, you know, like we have done for the last 3 years. You know, instead, you know, they call me a narcissist, but they're the one that's blocking me, quoting my tweets and calling me out for likes. You know, so that's a bit hip there, my friend. You know, so look, it is what it is, and like transfer rumors and stuff like that, like they'll always divide opinion, and people won't like it. But I put out what I hear, and I continue to do it. You know, and nothing's going to stop it. I only ever block anybody from my account if they start abusing people on my timeline. You know, I don't care about the abuse and stuff like that, because nobody can tell me who I am, because I know who I am. You know, so like as I've said, like, you know, I'm confident. I know who I am. So when people start to say you're this, that, and the other, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fair enough if that's what you think. But when it starts to get messy, like, you know, there was somebody in my, like, on my timeline, say, I suppose during the summer, he was struggling mental health wise and stuff like that, and his parents actually reached out to me saying that he was getting a lot of abuse because he followed my account and this, that, you know. So they gave me a few accounts and I blocked him from there, you know. And I just kind of go back and DMs or no, because he didn't want to lock his own account because he had like 23 followers, so then he had no interaction at all, you know. So I only ever block people if they start getting disrespectful to people that are following me, as people are trying to interact with me and stuff like that, like, you know. But people are afraid to interact with me positively now, anyway, because of the abuse they get, you know. So it's more fashionable to call me out than it is to actually try and interact with me. I have to question why, you know, because I can explain everything that I've ever said, you know. But once you get into explaining, then people are, oh, there he is, he's making excuses. And I'm like, yeah, fair enough.
Just on that point, can I just jump in? Because you owe me 20 quid. I put 20 euro on Fonseca becoming our manager off your tweet. So what happened there?
That's no problem.
There's still time. There's still time.
I'll be able to buy you 1 pint in Temple Bar.
Later, we can get that done. Right, Graham, we'll let you away. So.
Yeah, Sean, and thanks for bringing us through that. I mean, look, we've all seen it, you know, in terms of like, I mean, you're not the only one, of course. Anyone who's a kind of in and around this environment knows you know, you get more bad than good, because people are more likely to say something bad than good on the internet, as we know. The good news is, Sean, you can take a bit of happiness from this. We have someone on YouTube, Gerald Sawyer, saying that he's just paused Dancing with the Stars to watch this and to watch you. So do you know what I mean? That's really.
Does he want me to start dancing just to kind of? I can make up for last time. I don't mind, you know.
We'll see how quickly we run out of content. But if we start
Irish Mags dancing with the stars in the bleakers.
We know the show has taken a serious turn if we reach that point. So fingers crossed that doesn't happen. Right. Well, on that point, we do have an absolute ton of content to get through this evening. Most importantly, would be your questions. So anyone who's watching us on YouTube or on Twitch, get your questions in the chat. If you have anything you want to ask Sean or have discussed in the show, Alan and Krisho will be manning the chat and pulling the questions here for us to get through. And of course, don't forget to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and drop us a follow over on Twitch as well. Lads, before we go into transfers, I just want to quickly get your reactions, not only to the 2-0 win we had yesterday over Fulham, which was nice. We hadn't played a game for a while, so it's nice to bounce back with a win. But also the 5th round draw that just a few hours ago was confirmed, so we know that our opponents are going to be Blackburn, or It's Always Sunny in Wrexham, I guess is how I can describe it. Yeah. Alan, just really quickly on the game, looked like there was quite a successful meetup up in the Bleecker Street Bar.
Yeah, we did. We did good out turnout for the Bleecker, as usual. Let's be honest about it. Yeah, on the game, said the better. Wasn't pretty. We got a result. That's the sign of a good team. Playing badly, getting a result. That's exactly what you want. On the draw, I am praying that Blackburn Rovers beat Wrexham. I do not want to get beaten on the Disney Channel.
Yeah,
I can't do it. I cannot watch next year's that Wrexham TV show and look at us getting knocked out of the cup. So I'm praying we get Blackburn, because even if we lose in Ewood Park, it's better than losing on the Disney Channel.
I hadn't thought of that, but I probably don't watch the Disney Channel as much as you, Alan. But that's just a topic for another day, I would say. Krisho, really quickly over to you. Just like Alan kind of touched on the performance. Like, what was your take on that? Were we a little bit poor, kind of rusty, maybe having not had a game for a while, or did we, it was a good time when we came up against the poor side equally and just more clinical? Yeah,
I mean, I'm glad it's a collection of handsome fellas tonight, because that was son of a bitch ugly yesterday. The whole thing was ugly. We didn't play well at all. In fact, if Fulham were a bit more clinical, they might have been 2-0 up. But second half we played a lot better. But Dubravka did brilliantly again. I think he did really, really well. He made some excellent saves. But yeah, look, we got the win. We played bad and we won. All of us will take that. every day, all day. But it was ugly. It wasn't great.
Yeah, I think there's been talk about this. Like, we tend to either win well or lose. We don't always kind of have those really tight, kind of win ugly games, which is good to see. And I've come across quite a bit of praise for Dubravka since that kind of first game he stepped in on. I mean, for you, Sean, like, what were your thoughts on it in terms of individual performances? Anyone that stood out? Do you think anything from that game might make us react from a transfer market perspective as well?
I don't think so, really. Like functionally, it's just not working. Like everything that worked well last season isn't happening this season. That's down to injuries as well. When you take Joe Willock and you take Joelinton out of the side, you're taking out two incredible athletes, right? If you look at the Fulham game and where attacks broke down and where they kind of started to hurt us, you could copy and paste that into any game this season and even last season. The simple fact is, right, the way the system is designed, if you look at our back four and our midfield three, right, with Joelinton, and when you had a full team, you had Joelinton, you had Willock, you had everybody firing. That gap in between the midfield and the defense was a bear pit. If the ball came in there, we were turning teams over quickly, breaking. Press was incredible. Everything worked. If you look at it now, when it's not functioning, Dan Burn is coming narrow. Either Shah or Botman is trying to step into the midfield. You don't have that cover on the left-hand side that you are getting, from either Joelinton or Willock. It's either Longstaff or Miley there, and they just don't understand that role on the left. It seems so alien to him. And then you have Gordon, who's not tracking as much. He tracks enough for a left-sided forward, but not enough of a Joe Willock or a Joelinton, So that's where it functionally fails in. So the left side, there's huge gaps there. And again, you can copy and paste that into the AC Milan game. You can do it into any game you want. Anytime we've conceded like that, it's again, one of the defenders will try to step into the midfield. Bourne comes very tight, and then you don't have the protection of Joelinton and Willock because they played so well on the left last season. That gap in the midfield looks astronomical now because we don't have the players to fit the system. And I do believe that Eddie Howe has he can become an elite manager. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But I do have concerns the way that he hasn't adjusted things to close that gap in midfield when he didn't have the personnel to do it. And it's the same with Fulham, and it'll be the same for the rest of the season, because even if we do get somebody in it, it's not going to be a 6, and I don't think he's going to restrict Ramirez or pushing him back in there. The way that the midfielders are stepping in and not having Joelinton and Willock, it's a big ask, and it's like last season was the perfect storm. If you look at it, Newcastle actually had the second least changes to the starting 11 for the whole season. I think Arsenal could have been first. So we didn't have to change our first 11 for 30 plus games. The team that won the league, Man City, actually changed their first 11 the most.
Right? That's why Villa are doing very well this season. They really haven't changed the starting 11 for a series of games, and it shows. They're a tight team. That's why I'm worried about.
But see, that's why it's so unlucky as well. Like when you think of it, because Villa have had the same amount of games and they're playing Europa League as well. So they're alternating their team in the Europa League. So that's why you talk about increasing the baseline. Then, like, you have to have a core group of players that no matter who you could put in, they can carry out the basic instructions that the other players can. Miley is a fantastic talent, but he needs to understand how to play on the right side of a midfield three first without shoehorning him into the left side of midfield three, which can be totally alien for a right-footed player. Sean Longstaff isn't comfortable on the left side of midfield three. We've seen this a million times, so that's the thing, when you increase that baseline, you need to be able to alternate your players. I know talking about Man City is blue sky thinking because they've developed this for years, but they changed their starting 11 more between games rather than actually making changes in game. You have to have a core group of players that can carry out the instructions that the manager wants. Trying to replace that with, when you have Joelinton, Willock, and I keep on saying them, incredible athletes. Same with Almiron, same with Sean Longstaff on the other side. You have absolutely workhorses that will bring everything to the table and they'll give you 100% every single game. The drop off from them is crazy. And that's what needs to be addressed. It won't be addressed this season. It probably won't be addressed for another 2 transfer windows. And with the way we are money wise, we don't have money to spend in January. So we need a player out. They've been trying to ship players out since the start of the January window, but they've had no bites on it. Like, our players that we're trying to sell are probably 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th down the list on other clubs, and that's why it's going into the last couple of days.
Yeah, and I mean, you talked about Villa, and it made me think of Liverpool as well. I don't want to say they've been fortunate from an injury perspective. It's just we've been so unfortunate by comparison. Like, you know, a few other teams are obviously suffering with injuries, and you know, it's the game, it's the scheduling, it's all this talks about VAR is causing injuries because of hold-ups in play and all that. But like, I feel like Villa, you know, I think Tyrone Mings was out for a long one, and then Buendia. But aside from that, they've been relatively fortunate, I would say, on the injury front, and likewise with Liverpool. So
if you look at the Villa team, how many athletes are in that team? You know, they don't have a lot of athletes, and that's the difference. You know, with Newcastle, we're relying on athletes, which is a different thing. You know, if you look at the Villa team, you look at the midfielder like Kamara and these players, fantastically technically gifted players, and they understand space so well. The thing with the likes of Joelinton and Willock and, you know, Longstaff, they will just work teams into the ground, and they will outwork every single player because they're cardio machines. You know, relying on that going into the season, Captain Hindsight will say you shouldn't have, because you're going to break the body down. If you look at Jurgen Klopp at Dortmund the year he left, it was the same thing. You know, he was relying on athletes, and he ran them into the ground and they broke. I'm not saying that Howe did, you know, but this is what's going to happen if you have players that are sprinting non-stop for 90 minutes, and they're obviously doing that intensity level as well in training. Now you add in a Champions League where they're not training for 2 days in the midweek, you know, and then you have cup games in as well on top of that, and now you have injuries. You know, it's almost like we had the perfect storm last season, and it was just the total opposite this year. You know, but I think we have to be very patient as well, because you're talking about a manager and coaching staff that have never managed a Champions League season. You know, Eddie Howe is still very young in the sense of managing Bournemouth versus managing a team at the level of Newcastle, where we are with the ownership and stuff like that. It takes time. We're allowed to be frustrated, and we're allowed to have observations, and we're allowed to give out and complain. We followed this club all our lives, you know, so we have the opportunity to complain, you know, we can ask questions of why we don't understand things. Like, I still don't understand why he isn't addressing that gap in midfield when he doesn't have the athletes to close it, because if you watch it time and time again, Bourne comes narrow and he's almost looking over his shoulder, waiting for Willock or Joelinton to cover that space from, and they don't, and we get done every time. And that gap in midfield then remains there, you know. And it's just like Liverpool was an absolute embarrassment. You know, it's just he hasn't set up yet to reserve energy. You know, in play he still has. You still have your midfield, like simple things. You know, your fullbacks. If you want to reserve energy, your fullbacks never go past the ball. You know, and your centre midfielder, don't go past the centre circle. Reserve energy. Against Liverpool, every single time, Bourne, chalk on his boots, outside, way up, you know, wrong side of the pitch. You had the same routine, Livramento, you know, way too high, not reserving energy. They went flat to the clappers against Liverpool away from home. I couldn't fucking believe it. You know, and that is, you are going to be frustrated with that. Same thing with Forrest, like, you know, like Forrest caught us on the break a couple of times before they actually scored.
Yeah.
And he never done anything to address it. You know, and I absolutely 100% feel sorry for him injuries, because I don't know an injury crisis like it, where a manager it's not only losing players, but losing key pillars of the squad.
Yeah.
You know, it hasn't really happened like that for a manager. And I do feel sorry for him, but I am critical of how he's actually addressed it.
Yeah, and I think, like you touched on, there's a lot of new things happening for the management team, for the coaching team, for the players as well. A lot of them haven't played this like, not just playing Champions League football and the opponents there, but that frequency of games. You know, you take out Trippier and Bruno, and a few of them, like, it's just not that much experience. You mentioned there, Sean, big pillars, and I think that's a good place to start. We're going to jump into some questions in a moment, but there is a mention of Callum Wilson here, and I think that's probably poignant because just in the last few hours is a Chelsea rumor actually surfacing. Which gives us something to think about, because we know Chelsea definitely have their striker issues. So I guess, Sean, like, Callum Wilson is in that leadership circle. I think he's been our top goal scorer. He's got us out of a lot of holes. What's your latest take on Callum Wilson in terms of an outgoing transfer?
I think realistically, like, the thing with Wilson is he's been told he can leave. You know, same Miguel Almiron, like, you know, there's been a couple of players told, and you can see the reaction to it, all these cryptic tweets and stuff like that. So, but the problem for Wilson is that absolutely exceptional striker, but he's never fit, you know, and I don't think the trip to Dubai went down too well either when he was injured and recovering. You know, so he is on the list for Chelsea, and, you know, a couple of people have said that for the last 2 or 3 weeks, but the problem is he's down the list. You know, and I honestly think if they got an offer for Wilson, and even without a replacement, they'd let him go, because they know that you have the likes of, you have Arsenal, you have Chelsea and stuff like that. They need a striker, and they need it late in the window. If they make an offer, they'll accept it. Replace them. Say if Harvey Barnes and Joe Willock come back and they're fit, Gordon go into the centre. Can go in as a striker. The season, not saying just a dead rubber, but getting a striker isn't vital now. I think getting money in is more important. I don't think like this window was designed in probably 3 different ways, with Champions League football, with Europa League football, and without. And we're seeing it without now, where we have to be very careful with FFP because we are on the borderline of kind of falling foul of FFP. There's 2 sponsorship deals that they thought they'd have lined up by now, but there's been timing issues there. So I think they're with the Premier League at the moment, but they're dragging their feet over them, so you can't bank on that, because if they don't happen or if something goes wrong, then you're minus 10 points next season,
How much do we talking for Wilson?
I'd say probably talking 15, 20 million, I'd say. And again, at that, I'd say it'd be very, very structured, in the sense of you're probably talking, you might get, say, 10 million up front and 5 million if he plays X amount of games and things like that, because, let's be honest, a fit Callum Wilson, I'd have more over Ivan Toney, Watkins, any of them time after time. He's not for sale, but if we were interested in Callum Wilson right now, you'd be kind of thinking, Jesus Christ, I don't know about him, is he going to play? So that's why he's going. That's why a club like Chelsea are looking out for luxury. But I think if he does stay in the summer, I think we'll probably see him go to Saudi.
Speaking of Saudi, that's a good tangent. I think we had a question there about Almiron, but you mentioned it there, Sean. It's the other really logical asset that we might look at from an outgoing perspective, a player that we obviously do have players in other positions for. And looking at his age, his contract, and all that, there's value to be got there, I guess. Is the Al Shabaab link has it died completely? It really had momentum and then it stopped.
The thing with Almiron is, so there's the Al Shabaab one that's there. That deal is on the table if they want to do it. Almiron doesn't want to leave. I think it's Al Al as well, one of those other clubs. They also have an offer on the table from, but they can't do it until the summer because I think they're still bound by the amount of foreign players they can have. I don't think the new rules come in until the summer. So there's a lot of interest in Almiron from Saudi. There was a lot of interest last summer. He rejected it last summer. He wanted to stay. He rejected it. He's rejecting it so far this January. He wants to stay. He wants to move back to Atalanta. And there is, I suppose I would have probably said last summer and probably the start of the window, there is an opportunity for him to go back there in the summer. And that's where he wants to go. So I think the players looking at that. So money changes minds, but as of now, the player isn't keen on moving. But again, it's there. It's there to be done. I think you're probably talking about the 20 to 25 million mark, which is great money from him. He's off the books now in terms of FFP because it's 5 years up in his contract. So it's pure profit. So when you look at the likes of Wilson, the likes of Almiron, selling these players now, it's nearly pure profit.
Yeah, and there is an element of logic on it, even though I know myself, I'll speak for myself here, but you grow attached to these lads when they've been around a long time, and especially because they've seen the shit times to now be reaping the benefits of the good times, they've brought us there, especially, the running that Miggy's done, he must have more age in his legs than his actual age, that's for sure. Right, before we dive into the question, sorry, go ahead, Sean.
No, go on, belt away to questions.
Yeah. I was going to just, before we dive into the questions, one more question I really wanted to ask you on an outgoing front. And this is an emotive topic, which has a lot of us on the edge, and it's Joelinton. Now, in one way, okay, it's not anything to be concerned in the very immediate future for this window in particular. And obviously he's out injured for the season, but I can't stop seeing a tweet every day. Joelinton has played his last game for Newcastle, and it's a tough one because, again, he was there for the shit times. He's basically, reinvigorated his career, become such an unbelievable number 8 for us, and getting capped for Brazil, right? All through, obviously, the coaching and himself. It'd be awful hard to see him walk out the door, Sean.
But see, the thing for me with Joelinton is I actually was the first one to report this. It's not like me to claim a story, Jimmy, I'd be very modest like that. But I got dog's abuse when I tweeted why you're being so negative and stuff like that, because it's a very relevant conversation in the sense of, I think he's on about 80 grand a week. I'm told we've offered him around 120-ish, around that mark, and he wants more because there's a lot of clubs looking at him, and I told there's a Premier League club. They're hinting towards me like it's Chelsea are really, really looking at him. I would have put out a hint there a couple of weeks back saying that Pochettino really misses that Dembele role in the system. And I don't think Joelinton is identical to him the way he was at Spurs, but again, it's that aggressive, athletic ball carrier that he wants from midfield. For me, with Joelinton, I always when when players are going to go and you have an emotional attachment to them, I absolutely love Joelinton. Like, you know, when my kids get older and if I'm ever going to teach them about mental strength and all this kind of stuff in sport, I'll tell them the story of Joelinton and how he got on at Newcastle and what he done. You know, his redemption arc is incredible. But when I speak to other fans about it, and I was like, you know, a friend of mine, Liverpool fan, I was like, would you pay 30-40 million for Joelinton? He's like, okay, 28 years of age. If you take away his athleticism, what does he have? I'm like, okay. He's like, that's the thing. He said, if you watch him at the start of the season when he was carrying this injury, because this injury has been his knee and his thigh for basically most of the season, it's kind of, the injury is pretty kind of related, you know. And he's like, if you look at the games where he was hampered by that injury, if you take away his athleticism, he doesn't give you much value on the ball.
Yeah.
So when I think about it as when you put the neutral cap on, you're kind of thinking, okay, it makes sense that in the summer if somebody offers you 30 to 40 million from at 28 years of age, I'm not saying 28 years of age is old, but you know, if you're giving him a 4-year or 5-year contract, you're thinking, okay, relying on his athleticism, he's an absolute monster. How long does his athleticism carry him? You know, again, when the speed goes and that power and aggression, where's the technical game? You know, and I'm saying that with a very heavy heart because I absolutely love the man. Like, I think he's my favorite Newcastle player. First name on the team sheet, you know, time after time. But I can see the logic behind it, that they don't want to give him a long 4 or 5-year contract on big money because that decline could be rapid. You know, this season is, you put this season down to look at injuries and stuff like that, and he's probably pushed himself too far. You know, as was said to me by somebody close to the club, is that I think you manage an injury, but you have to manage the player as well. Joelinton's leg could be falling off and he'll tell you he'll play. And I think that's what they mismanaged at the start of the season. They went on how the player felt and he just wanted to keep on playing because he wants to be in the Brazil squad. So he probably played a lot of the time through injuries to the detriment of himself, and now he's ended up where he is. You know, so I don't think they managed the player well along with the injury. So I think a few people have to hold their hands up there, you know. But
the medical staff. Yeah, the medical staff have to hold their hands up there.
It's not even that though. Like, you know, like the medical staff. So like, you see a lot of people fucking harping on about the medical staff, you know. But like, the medical staff will give their diagnosis, right? Then you have the player, and then the management staff then as well. You know, so there's three equations there. It's easy to point at the medical staff. You know, they might say he needs 4 weeks off. The player saying, no, I'm grand, I can run. You know, and then the manager's like, he's telling me he can run. You know, so there's a lot of stuff to bring into the equation there. So like, they're an easy target. You know, but again, look, they probably have got things wrong as well. But that's my feeling on it. And with Joelinton, they won't increase the offer. And I think he'd probably go because, again, you know what? He's in his 5th season, he's in his 4th season, so he has a year left on the books for FFP. So you're talking what we paid 40 million from, so there's roughly 8 million left to pay off when you're talking FFP wise. So you're talking, if you're getting 40 million from 30 million, you're getting 20. Like, if you're getting 30 million, you're getting probably 20 odd million pure profit. So that's very good towards FFP then as well, and it probably keeps Bruno for another season in that sense, you know.
Alan, you look like you're having an emotional dilemma there, so we're going to come to you.
That's a depressingly good way of looking at it, if I'm honest with you, Sean. I didn't want to look at it like that, but when you speak about it from a neutral point of view, you're going,
there's a reason people pay me so much to come on podcasts, lads.
Don't you start this rumor already. I've gotten enough of this already.
I have not received any payments. Chris Shaw has sent me some pictures.
Thank you, everyone.
I have said it.
With just a hat on, I will lead rest of your imagination.
I don't know what Alan's been promising now. We've talked to you about this,
Alan. That's a depressingly good way of looking at it. Because, that's all right, if I know what I mean. And I don't want it to be right, but it is all right what you've just said. And I love that man. He's a mountain of a man, and I don't want him to go anywhere. But could he be replaced soon? I think he could as well.
It'd be lovely as well if you know, you talked about like you're managing the player wants to play the medical team, but like, you know, again, down to injuries, it's hard. Like, you want to manage his minutes by having other players that can come in, but we've just not
absolutely
had it,
so. You know, because you
probably
his injury went in tandem with Joe Willock as well, like.
You know? And you know, like you talk about athletes and athleticism, like Joe Willock is that, you know what I mean? So
I worry about him though. Anyway.
We'll probably come back to that topic, but I think, you know, we've talked about midfield, we've talked about not having options. We've talked about paying Sean, which we're not going to do, but Sean, I'll pay you in compliments because we have a couple of lads in chat here praising your tactical knowledge. So I think it was David Walsh basically said, ITK stuff aside, there are very few on NUFC Twitter that see the game well as tactically as Sean. Insights are always spot on. So there's the first installment of your payment. And Mark Burns says Sean's understanding of the tactical side of the things on the pitch is fantastic. So there's your compliments. Not any more for the time being. Thanks for all the comments, folks. And yeah, if you are watching us or listening on YouTube, on Twitch, get your questions in the chat because we're going to go straight into them right now, and we're going to really focus on incoming transfers. We'll probably be looking at a mix of January and I guess the summer as well. Summer's not that far away realistically. You know, you're talking 4 months, but obviously everybody wants it now. We have Simon Mulholland first off the block. He said, I feel like I'm the only one to see this, but this club are crying out for a top-class left wing-back and a number 10. Does anyone out there agree? The number 10 one is interesting considering we don't really deploy one. So I'll start with you, Sean, in terms of, you've got 2 questions there really, a left wing-back and then potentially a number 10 or an attacking midfielder.
So if you look at it, right, if you look at football and if you look at attacking, right, you have 3 key pillars of attack. Right, you have controlled attacks, you have transitions, right, and you have set pieces, right. Last year, our transitions, both defensively and offensively, have been incredible. Our controlled attacks were terrible. You know, a controlled attack is where you can actually maintain possession in the final third. The likes of Bernardo Silva's, Phil Foden's, and stuff like that. You know, that's why James Maddison, you know, made so much sense. It was just like the absolute perfect signing. So people say you don't need a number 10, but the traditional number 10 is gone. Your 10 now essentially is basically your right winger, or your left winger is your 10. You know, somebody that is really comfortable on the ball, but you also have the tactical fluency that you can cover their defensive work. So essentially, like, defensively, you have 2 forwards. You know, that's your number 10 staying high on either the left or the right and keeping the full back pinned in. So I think absolutely we need a number 10 in the skill set wise, but not actually in the position on the pitch. You know, a lot of people will say 4-3-3, but if you watch a game, a team very rarely actually stays in the formation you put on paper. You know, like Man City go with 2 at the back. You know, 9 times out of 10 they'll play with 2 at the back. They'll play with 4 in midfield. They're actually a 2-4-4 rather than a 4-4-2. You know, so like, I think the traditional formation on paper is just to actually put something down on paper. If you watch a team in play, the formation is totally different. You know, so I think a left wing back wouldn't suit us, and it's not going to happen. It's not what Howe wants, I don't think. And I think with signing Livramento at right back as well, you know, like you talk about tactical versus technical trade-off. And that's why I'd always say Bourne will start. And I took a lot of abuse in the group and stuff like that. Like, Bourne will start 9 times out of 10 at left back because of his heading ability. You know, we passed on Grimaldo because of this. You know, Lewis Hall was brought in, but like, people say play Hall, and I've done it myself. Like, you know, like in cup games and stuff. He's only 18. He's just a kid. You know, he's learning the game. And if you watched Hall play last season, there was a lot of defensive gaps to his game. So allow him the time to work through it, because from what I'm hearing is that the obligation will be hit anyway. But it's based on the position that we finished in the league. You know, so that obligation should be met. So we're getting a left back. I think we will see more of a. I think we'll bring in a centre back that is comfortable playing in the full back position rather than bringing another left back. You know, I think we will look at somebody very much in the Dan Bourne mold that can play centre back and left back. You know, so I think we'll probably see 2 centre backs coming in the summer, and the number 10 position then you have Morgan Gibbs White. So I think essentially you'll probably see Gibbs White to come in to replace Joelinton, if Joelinton does leave. And I know you're thinking, okay, they don't match in position wise, but then you'll bring somebody else into the midfield to match that. But what you'll see and what you need is stabilizers in your team. And what a stabilizer is a multifaceted player that can play in multiple positions. You know, we lack that in our baseline of players, big time. You know, like, we have X amount of right-sided midfielders that can't play on the left side of midfield 3. You know, like, people might say midfield is midfield, you know, but it's not. Like, it's totally different. So I absolutely agree. If I was looking at the team, I'd say yes, fair enough. You know, in my eyes, I'd bring in a left back that is excellent at going forward, and then you have Livramento, you have the left back, then you bring in a number 6. You know, in the mold of, who would you say? You could even think, I know Onan is a bit of an 8 as well, but like any 6, basically name a number 6 and you could put him in there, a Declan Rice type, split the centre backs, and your midfielder creates a back 3 then. But Eddie Howe won't do that. You know, when you're talking about players coming into the club, look through Eddie Howe's eyes in a sense, and it's not me saying, oh, you know exactly what Eddie Howe was thinking. I think we all know by now. You know, you have to be 6 foot, athletic, and be able to play in a couple of positions. with Dan Byrne's height has to be replaced. The reason why we didn't sign the likes of Tabido and players that were linked during the summer at right centre back is because their heading ability isn't good enough. They weren't good enough in the air. They had the pace. We need pace in defence. We've been done for pace so many times this season. It's frightening. And we play a high enough line. And with Nick Pope, as well, kind of compounded that. But we won't sign a centre back that isn't good in the air. And he will trade pace for heading ability. So that's the thing. When you talk left wing back, you're thinking the likes of your Grimaldos and Joric there, who's at RB, these flying forward, non-stop up and down the line. DeMarco, we did hold talks into Milan about DeMarco. There was a very good deal to be done there, but again, you're talking heading ability, it's that trade-off, and that's what people have to, when you're talking about player X, Y, and Z, you have to think of the tactical trade-off. Eddie Howe, next season, if you look at our starting 11, you're going to have a minimum of 3 players that are above 6 foot that can head the ball really well. That's what he wants.
Is there anything in your man Piero Hincapié from Leverkusen? Now I know he's going to be big money.
I genuinely think, and I've said this a few times, I think if Hall didn't become available at Crystal Palace, I think he probably could have been a Newcastle player in the summer. He was offered to a couple of English clubs. We were very interested in him, and I know the scouting team pushed his name fairly hard, but I'd say we're probably gone past the stage now of being able to afford him this year. I think he's gone up that level, and I think we have to stretch our budget a little bit more. I think in the last transfer window, we focused too much on bringing in players that would impact the first 11 rather than actually kind of come in and build that baseline of the squad. All the money was put towards Harvey Barnes and Sandro Tonali. We signed great players, but we didn't address the glaring weaknesses.
Yeah, and everyone talks about being a long-term kind of a thing, right? And maybe we're just an impatient fan base because we've taken a long time to get to where we are. But the reality of it is, everyone says that we're probably ahead of where we're meant to be. That applies all over the place. I have a question here. Then you mentioned height, Sean.
Yep.
Georgi Mamardashvili, because that man is about 6'8".
Yeah.
Obviously, the goalkeeper. There's a rumor that Pope has had a setback with his injury. We have a question from Callum. Any talks there on Mamardashvili or the goalkeeper position?
It won't be this summer, or won't be this January. Sorry, but in the summer they'll look at Ramsdale, who is Eddie Howe's choice, right? You look at Mamardashvili, who is the scout's choice, and then you look at a player that can challenge Pope. So Ramsdale will go straight in as number 1. So Mamardashvili will go straight in as number 1. So that's, you have your Eddie Howe choice, you have your scouting team choice, right? And then number 3, you have your one that will come in and challenge Pope, which is Chilavert, I think his name is, the Lille goalkeeper. So they're the 3 that they're looking at the moment. So people say you link a lot of names to the clubs and stuff like that, but clubs will have 500 players on the database.
Absolutely.
And what people don't realize is that now scouting has changed massively. Nearly every team uses the same database. These players are available to everyone. It's just the decision of the manager of who they select to sign. The way the Brighton model is and the way it works is that De Zerbi and Potter previously, he's like, if you can be a player that fits my system, let's try him out. Whereas Howe is very much on the Premier League and leaders, and I do understand it. I've been critical in a sense of why so many Premier League players and stuff, but if you look at this summer that's coming up, right, you're talking, we're losing them, we're going to lose Lascelles, we're losing Wilson, we're losing Ritchie, we're losing Paul Dummett, losing Almiron. Almiron mightn't be vocal, but you can guarantee Almiron's the first out in the training ground. He's running around the place like a wasp. That's a bar setter. So we're losing 5 critical players to that leadership group in the sense of the example that they set. So that's why he's so keen on bringing in Premier League players that he knows that they're going to give him a certain amount. The likes of Harvey Barnes and players like these. That's why he wants these players in. He knows them. He's done the background checks. He knows these players are going to come in and become his next leadership group to tie us over until we start to bring in these players. So I think we have to be very patient. I am against this all Premier League players. When it comes to talent-wise, I may have to stretch the budget, but he has to build a new leadership group. So I think we have to trust Howe on that. People will say, Philip Billing, he's this, that, and the other. Philip Billing is not a bad footballer. He's not the first I'd pick. Philip Billing is a good footballer. He's been made available to the club. Works hard, good player, gives 100% on the pitch, absolutely bullied us at St. James's Park last season. He's the first player I've seen physically dominate Joelinton. That's a player that could come in and be a very strong leader. You know, talent is one thing, leaders are another. You know, and that's the thing. Like, you know, so like I think people have to be very patient, because replacing this leadership group is going to take time. It's going to be frustrating.
And realistically, it's probably it's the same leadership group, and a lot of the core players that were there through the Steve Bruce times, the Mike Ashley times. You know what I mean? So
absolutely,
even though we've gone through transition, we're still going through transition, and we still have a lot more transition to go. Another question in chat here, and sticking just with that defensive area, I guess. Question here from Callum again. Would we look at any frees in the summer? And he's named two, Lloyd Kelly, who's obviously at Bournemouth. I didn't know he was available on a free. But I do know that Tosin Adarabioyo at Fulham is on a free. Any whispers there on those players for any clubs, and obviously specifically Newcastle?
But like, Tosin, so he's been linked to the club for a long time. Just after the takeover happened, I would have put out a tweet saying that the two top centre-back targets are Sveb Bomp and then Tosin Adarabioyo. So he's been there and he's always been linked, but we've never actually pushed through on a transfer from. I don't know why, you know, but the club like him. You know, they know he's a good lad, fantastic in the air. He has absolutely every attribute that we look for in a player. The thing about him, though, is he's not signed the new contract and he's turned down multiple moves. You know, like he had a couple of moves to Italy, France, and stuff like that lined up. I think he could have went to Spurs in the summer, turned that down. So he's turning down a lot of moves. So is he just waiting to see out the contract and see what happens in the summer, you know? But yeah, he's definitely on the agenda, you know. If you're looking at the two top targets for centre-back positions, and I'll get back to Kelly in a second, it's probably Tosin, I'd say. Well, at the top level you're talking, they like Tapsoba, but the problem with him is that he plays his best football on the left side of a centre-back, whereas he's right-footed centre-back, but much like Guai there at Palace, they're actually more comfortable on the left side. If you put them on the right side, they don't look as good, you know. So you have Tapsoba, who they've looked at, but it's Malik Taw at AC Milan. That's the number one. If they could, I'm telling you now, if you could offer them any centre-back in the morning, he's the one that they'd choose. So he's the one that, so we have a centre-back position to fill, right? You have Taw, who can play across the back four. He's comfortable in the full back positions. He's comfortable on the left side and the right side of the centre back. He's even comfortable stepping into midfield. So he has the skill set that we're looking for. Good in the air, quick, absolutely everything. And then you have Tosin as well, who they're also looking at. So you have to replace the gap that's there, but you also have to replace Lascelles, who's leaving. You know, so depending on the price, they're the two ones that they're looking at. You know, so on Lloyd Kelly was the first one that Eddie Howe tried to sign. He tried to sign him a couple of times that January, but just couldn't make the deal happen. They wanted excessive amounts. Since then, he's broke down so many times, you know, and you talk about athleticism, and he's very much a player that he'd probably look to fill that left back role instead of Byrne. He constantly has muscle injuries all the time. You know, there's something wrong there, and maybe on a free they'll take a risk on him depending on what the wages is, but a free transfer is never free. You know, Grimaldo was a free transfer, but you're talking 120 grand a week, and it was a 9 million signing on fee. So you could actually end up probably paying more money on the side. Yeah. Wow. You know, so a free transfer is never free, you know, and that's what people have to factor in as well. Like, you know, so it depends what it looks like in the summer, I suppose. But again, the AC Milan, Spurs, Liverpool, they're looking at him because he's a player, you know, but just understanding his injuries is the thing. And I think Newcastle will be very cautious about investing in injured players.
Well, we've been traumatized by injury, let's be fair. Yeah. So, you know, I think it's going to create a whole different dimension on the medical if and when we do get players over the line. Sean, I feel like we are doing a lot of talk. Like, I think we're all level-headed enough here anyway, lads, the four of us at least, to be able to look. Chris was shaking his head, to be looking into the future and thinking, you know, there's plans, there's the summer, there's obviously what happens after the 1st of July with the financial calendar and stuff. So I've got a question here from the Golden God. I'm actually going to bring it up on screen. And it says, you know, bear in mind, as we record this, it's the 28th of January. So we're, 3 days out from the transfer window closing. So the question from the Golden God, Sean, is what do you think is the most realistic signing we could make before the end of January? Or if you had to pick one, I suppose, to put your house on it, Sean.
There's only two players since probably, I'd say, mid-December to now that I've heard that the club have had genuine talks with, and that's Philip Billing and Calvin Phillips. So as of now, it's probably they like Rocco Reitz at Mönchengladbach, but they're flying in the league. He's an absolute staunch fan. I don't think they'll sell him in January. I know they've definitely inquired. So they've inquired about a lot of players, you know, but when you talk about genuine interest, Desiree Doué as well at Rennes, who they looked at a few times. So when you talk about actual concrete links that like players that their club will sell them, Bournemouth are being very favourable in the deal they're offering, because for Bournemouth with Billing, you're talking they owe nothing on him. His fee is off the books, essentially. So they can afford to loan him out once his wages are covered, and any money at all they get is profit. When you're loaning Calvin Phillips, like the thing with the Calvin Phillips deal is, like if you're loaning Calvin Phillips, he has, and this is what Man City asked for, right? They wanted his amortized amount covered on the loan deal, so they've signed him for 50 million, right, over 5 seasons. So there was a lot of talk about 7 million, 8 million, all this kind of stuff. They wanted 5 million because that's how much they're paying from, right? And you pay his wages. Plain and simple. That's what they want, right? And it's
Not wages too.
Right? You're talking about 130 grand a week, So again, when you're in negotiations with Joelinton and you're offering a max, you're bringing in a 28-year-old player and you're covering him on 120 grand a week. With Calvin Phillips, if we were in Europa League, even Champions League, or if we sold a player in the first week of the window, he'd be a Newcastle player. Then Joelinton, Ray Sunderland compounded that. Right, why I went all in. If you look back at it, I was the one that was denying it the whole time because I just couldn't see it, and there was a few personal things as well with him that I was kind of thinking we won't go near him. But too many people started saying it. It was very openly talked about, kind of amongst recruitment teams, journals, and stuff like that. And I suppose probably late December, Calvin Phillips was basically a Newcastle player. The players at the training ground were waiting for his arrival. He was in full agreement. He knew what the plan was for him, and the clubs were in talks with a bit of brinksmanship there, and there was an open agreement that they were pushing for an obligation first, and there was no obligation. So as I would have said at the time, Newcastle didn't want to pay his wages in full, and that's what the kind of talks were centering around. But the deal will get done. The player wants it. Newcastle want him. Then the Joelinton injury came into play. And things change. It's simple as that, really. So look, again, I know I'm probably clairvoyant. I should be able to see the future, but I couldn't see Joelinton's injury, unfortunately. But that's what happened, And it's if Joelinton doesn't get injured, Calvin Phillips is a Newcastle player, and things change. There was no 7 million fee or anything like that. It was you cover his amortized amount because we don't want to be paying for a player to go on loan, and you pay his wages in full. Simple as that.
Things change. That might be the title of this week's podcast, Sean. Thank you very much. You've done the job.
I usually have to say that every week.
Like I said, things change.
But yeah, if you ask me, I'd say Billing is probably the only one that's active at the moment, and it's not a case of that we went out chasing Billing. It was made available to us, I think, more than anything else, because in around the Onana links and stuff like that, it's not realistic to buy Onana in January. Same with Gibbs White. I just think that was. See, people say to me, "You're clickbait." There's nothing to click on. It's my account. I'm not monetized. I'm not blue ticked. There was a fella saying, it was like, don't click on his links, don't comment on him, don't like him, because then he stops making money. I'm like, how does that happen? To even understand how it works. So, the definition of clickbait is Onana and Gibbs White. Everybody knows that they're not targets until the summer. We don't have the money. The same people are telling us that we're bound by FFP are trying to tell us that we're going to make a £60 million transfer in January. And if Everton, if we even contacted Everton for Onana, they would be singing from the rooftops, because what you have to remember as well is that probably the focal point of the Amazon documentary, probably I think it was episode 1 or 2, was Stavely hardballing Everton. They're not going to do her any favours in the transfer. No. I love the woman. She's been incredible for the club and stuff like that. But I've never seen anybody openly talk about negotiations like that and use it as a selling point for a documentary. It didn't look professional, and I think it's probably hampered us in a certain sense that it was a muscle flex, and there was no need for it. Look at what we can do in the transfer market. And I think that's why it was if we even fucking picked up the phone to Everton, they'd be telling people, and the same with Gibbs White, they're going to look for the best possible fee, and it's going to become a transfer battle,
They paid enough for him as well,
Yeah.
They did. They paid 40 million for him,
Yeah. And you know what? He's proved. At the time, I was like, geez, because I don't even remember him banging for Wolves or even just being first choice all the time. So I thought it was a high fee, but obviously looking back, they've made that back in terms of his contribution. Right. So we're going to fire through some more questions here. And we've talked about filling billing there. We've talked about the January window not being that far away. And by the way, folks, if you are listening, don't be afraid to get your questions in the chat there. We'll be live for another little while yet.
And like and
either on
subscribe.
Twitch and YouTube. And like
Exactly.
and subscribe, as Sean said. And follow us on all the socials. Really good question here from Sean Gilly. And basically, it's tying into that number 6. But what he's asked us is, Bruno's favorite position is an 8. If we don't get a proper 6 and a proper 6, is there a danger that Bruno could think, I'm not staying on to be a number 6 for another season? Whether that's obviously from now until the summer or even beyond that.
But see, I think in the, it's kind of in the perfect storm, this wouldn't be an issue because Bruno wouldn't spend as much time in the 6 with a fully fit team. Like you're taking Tonali out, who was in to help that. They were going to kind of create that little pivot, whereas one drops in, one doesn't drop in. I don't see Tonali as a 6 at all, but as a 6'8", he can become functional in that role. So you have Tonali out, Joelinton out, Willock out for most of the season, Longstaff out for a large part of the season. So it's almost by default we've seen him in that 6 role more often. The problem is when you have your central 8, right, who is your first line of the press. So he's the first one to press. So he's pressing. Your left and your right side of your left and right side 8s, right, are static. They're watching the game. The ball breaks. That's the gap that you see in. If you think if it's either like when Willock is there, Willock comes across and presses, Joelinton goes in and presses, Longstaff can go in and press, and Bruno sits back a bit, it all just looks a little bit better. There was a lot more fluency last season. We don't have that opportunity this season where Botman or Shar steps in. You see it happen a few times yesterday where the defence got narrow and one of them stepped in, and the minute they stepped in, the left-hand side, you could have drove a bus down it, and that's what's going to continue to happen. I'd like to see Eddie Howe address it, and I'd like to see him bring in someone that is more 6 dominant than 8. Onana ticks all the boxes, but we could have signed Onana a year and a half ago for half that price. So
Sean, is there anything in Ederson at all from Atalanta?
There is. He likes him, but again, I don't think Howe is going to spend that money on a player that's not Premier League proven. So like when you're like, there's 2 things, and like this is a rule for like what I've got is with Howe is that he doesn't want to integrate more than 4 players at once, and he doesn't want to integrate more than 1 player from abroad.
Right.
Okay. So like you have to factor that into your thinking when you're bringing in players. Like, and I understand like when you talk about Gibbs White, there's probably another 10 players on the continent that would cost half the price that would probably be as good as him. But at the end of the day, you don't know what you're getting. Some managers trust the data and they believe that Jay can come in and they'll work through the personality and all this kind of stuff. Other managers don't. So I think we have to be patient with what we have. He's proven he's an exceptional manager. What he done at Bournemouth to get him up to the Premier League was unbelievable, and what he done at Newcastle last season was. But at the moment, he's an excellent manager in the perfect scenario. For me, he needs to show that he's a manager that can work in an unperfect position in the sense of with Bournemouth as well. Bournemouth got injuries the year they got relegated, and he didn't counteract those injuries, and that was a big flaw that was seen in his game. Well, granted, his fullbacks stayed way too far off the pitch, and there was a space as well in between the defence and the midfield at Bournemouth that wasn't addressed. He brought in Lorma to do that. Lorma didn't do that job well as a 6 for Bournemouth because Eddie Howe couldn't fit Lorma into his position properly because he went to a 4-1-4-1. Right, Eddie Howe likes having inverted wingers high up the pitch close to a centre forward, and when Lorma came in, he actually couldn't really bring Lorma into the tactical solution, and I think that's why he's probably against bringing in a 6 at Newcastle as well. So I think if we are going to bring in a 6, it has to be a 6-8. Ederson is excellent, like he has the skill set to do that job. And again, if you're going for 60 million for Onana, Ederson comes in and I probably think he's better. Like people look at Onana and they think he's 6'6" or whatever, absolute beast. So Sean Dyche is actually critical of how good he is in the air. So if you take away that aerial ability, there's a lot of players that are better than him.
Okay.
Yeah, and like the number 6 talk continues and probably will continue for the rest of the season, especially if we don't get anyone like if we got Philip Billing in, people might kind of sit back a little bit and go, okay, we've got another body in there. It's Premier League proven. He also knows where the goal is, to be fair. But I think it'll still be on everyone's kind of minds. Let's move away though from defensive midfielder for a moment. We've got a question here from Punter with a lot of numbers in your username that I'm not going to read them all out. If it's his phone number, you're welcome to it, folks. The question here is, Sean, what's the view on forwards coming in to replace the likes of Miggy and Wilson, who seem to be on the way out, either in this window or the next? He's written, "Give us a done deal" with a smiley face. You can't turn that down.
Okay, so if we stayed in the Champions League, and he didn't get injured, I'd say we would have went all in for Brian Mbeumo in January from Brentford. Yeah.
Ooh.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think he's one to keep an eye on. He's one that I think they would have went fairly heavy on in January. They've watched him for a while. They wanted to see how he integrated into the Premier League. Everything looks good with him. I think if that injury didn't come about, and if we had Europa League or Champions League, and if you're talking the injuries to Joelinton and perfect storm kind of stuff, but I think Mbeumo would have been a very hot topic in January for a lot of clubs. But I think definitely for us, really, really liked. He is the definition of a perfect inverted right winger. And he can probably play across the front three, can play a little bit deeper, comfortable in an A position. If you want to look at the perfect Eddie Howe player, he's probably that.
Wow.
It's a name that I haven't heard. With Newcastle. Obviously, yeah, he picked up an injury as well, I think. But he's one of those players that, most people know that if you're watching this show, I'm a bit of a football manager enthusiast, and I remember seeing Mbeumo a couple of years ago in FM, and it was the first time I'd spotted him because he's French, and when I saw him in the Premier League, I was kind of surprised because he was looking a lot better. Glorious beard as well. Right, let's go on to. We have plenty of questions to get through. We still have a bit of time. Sean, or do you know what, lads, open to the group really to get thoughts. In the next transfer window, how much do we think Newcastle will have to play with? I'll actually put this on the screen. How much does Sean and ourselves think that we will have to play with if you include the Champions League money with/without any possible sales of players? And maybe throwing in like the sponsorship deals as well, right? Because that also comes into play.
Well, I'll take that. I think the Champions League money will have in and around 150, maybe a little bit more, I think, to spend, but we will or won't spend that amount. It's totally different, if you know what I mean.
But see, I think so. I always find it funny when people talk about how much a club is going to spend in the summer. What is a budget? So you have your upfront fee. So a team will have cash in the bank, right? So a budget is what you can pay in cash for a player. If you go out and if you sign, when we sign, say, Harvey Barnes, we sign Tino Livramento, we sign Sandro Tonali, whatever, say if it added up to 160 million, right? That 160 million is obviously facilitated over 5 years, right? So that's built into the FFP model, but we probably only spend 60 million. So it's understanding what the cash balance is. Like what Newcastle have next year is you have to add in, like your Champions Leagues and all this kind of stuff. Like I reckon comfortably they probably have about 120 million cash to actually play around with in the summer. Because you're talking the Champions League money comes in, the sponsorship deals come in. They have 2 big sponsorships. I think one of them is with a media group that's currently held up at the moment. So there's big sponsorship deals to come in. So they could have 120 million cash to spend in the summer. They just need to stretch that. 120 million cash can get you 400 million worth of players. They won't spend that, but 120 million can bring up your budget in that sense. You have to understand how you're going to facilitate that over the next 5 years. And that's what the key is. Well, over the next 3 years, the way FFP is, but I reckon there will be changes to financial fair play in the next round of talks. So is it January, February, March? I think is their meeting. So they will change the cap. They'll probably bring up around the 200 million mark. Because what people have to realize as well is that probably one of the biggest incomes the English government have is tax on football. The tax on football is crazy, right? They are bringing in an independent regulator now, right? This January transfer window and the lack of movement of players and money and all this kind of stuff had huge financial implications on the tax. Think of it that way, so the government are going to look at this. The independent regulator is going to be, on a string from the government, and they're going to be thinking we need cash flow in probably our most profitable area. Obviously outside you have oil and all this kind of stuff, like Brian talking about, like something that they don't actually do anything for. They don't pay anybody in it, in that sector. It's just free money for them almost. They want the Premier League to be a juggernaut. If FFP starts to slow that down, FFP will be disbanded. They will change it. They will make changes. So like I can remember there was a politician came out and he was like, we need to freeze players' wages during COVID and all this kind of stuff. And there was like a financial consultant on Sky afterwards saying, you do realize that their wages probably keep the country afloat. So like freezing this doesn't make any fucking sense at all. So the way this transfer window went, isn't beneficial. So when the independent regulator comes in, this will all change. You know, it's a moment in time. So when we talk about transfer budget in the summer, I think we probably bring 4 players in based on the Eddie Howe model, and we have about 120 million cash flow. I'd say we'd have about 120 million to spend. Like, you know, it's a lot of money in January. On the summer,
there's always looking at the first team signings, but we're obviously not. We're looking at other elements of the squad. You know, we signed that young players at Alfie Harrison from Man City. We've also been looking at bolstering the youth teams, and you know, I mean, it's a topic for another podcast. We'll get you on again, Sean, because our youth teams have basically failed for years, been neglected for so long, and even I saw the guy who was playing for Liverpool today, McConnell, I think it is.
Yeah, it's a Newcastle fan.
Is a Newcastle fan and born and bred Geordie, which is just it's cruel.
See, they have put a lot of time and effort into the academy and trying to get players up, but players the one like that age they don't move to Newcastle. You know, if you look at what's the young fella's name? There's a young fella from Southampton there. He moved to Chelsea, like, and he got homesick and he went back home straight away. So people like to stay at home. You know, the thing about Newcastle is they tried to break the Irish market, but the Irish market is sewn up by Man City and Brighton at the moment. I know you have Chelsea trying to get in as well. You know, so that's a tough one to crack. And again, our academy is probably the lowest grade academy in the Premier League at the moment, I'd say. And you had all the work going on at the training ground and all this kind of stuff. So again, being able to take in so many players, I think we'll see a bigger influx in the summer. Probably another 1 or 2 in this year, but in the summer when the training ground is like it's actually usable now, and plans are in place for the new training ground, I think it'll take time. Like, you know, with the academy and stuff like that, we're starting from scratch. You know, you probably have Shamrock Rovers. They probably have a better academy system than Newcastle do at the moment. You know, and that's not even taking the piss. Like it's absolute bare bones kind of stuff. Like, was it not last year? I think Newcastle only offered 1 scholarship a year ago. That's crazy. Like, you know, that shows a drop off in talent and who's actually come to the club. Like, you know, players would rather go down to the stadium late. Like,
it is crazy when you think, you know, the size of the Northeast, and obviously we're the biggest club up there by a long way, right? It shouldn't happen that we see players from the area actually turning up at other clubs. It brings me back to Michael Carrick turning out for West Ham, and I was like, how did he never end up at Newcastle? But anyway, again, a podcast for another day. Probably tying into that topic though, like, you know, linking into we'll talk about Dan Ashworth really, because obviously a lot of it's coming through him. We have a comment here from Dave saying obviously there's a whole new scouting team instead of analysts through Dan Ashworth, so all the summer targets would be coming through already. But an interesting one here from DUP95. He said he saw something earlier suggesting Ashworth will gain more control over transfers to keep him away from Man United, or Man Red as we like to call them around here. If that's true, I assume that means less power for Eddie Howe. How do you think that would change our player profile / would it piss off Eddie Howe? That's an interesting one. I mean, I think Ashworth has a good kind of reign of control since he's come in, but any word on increasing
I would have
the Man Red?
I would have put out a tweet there recently about the recruitment strategy changing and stuff like that. Like, what I don't think, and this is just my opinion, right? I don't think Eddie Howe would have such control over transfers if Ashworth was in before Howe came in. You know, Howe had agreements in place, you know, and like there's certain people around the club, you know, that are too pally and are too favourable when it comes to deals and stuff like that. You know, and I don't think it's something that Ashworth likes, you know, constantly dealing with the same people, same systems, you know, same kind of group of players, you know, tied to a certain agency. So I think Ashworth probably would have had a different system set up. Granted, I do believe, and I think it is correct, that the manager should have the final say. But again, you need trust at every level. I got a lot of abuse for saying that. At Bournemouth, Ashworth trusted Winsley. He trusted Jewell. And Jewell trusted fucking Potter, and it went back and forth. You know, that group of 4 people had 100% trust in each other. I don't think that's there at Newcastle at the moment. You know, because there are players that have been extensively scouted, put the Howe in his team, and they've said no. Do you get me? Oh. You get things right, you get things wrong.
Just a text message from Steve Nixon asking Sean to... because we're friends now, you know, we're friends. I have pals too, Sean. He's just saying, like, you know, thanks for popping a couple of red herrings live on the internet. He appreciates it.
No problem. That's what I do.
Yeah.
But
throwing them off the
with that, like, you know, like you're talking, I think Eddie Howe does need to be a bit more flexible with bringing in targets from abroad, you know, and probably trusting himself to actually to integrate them into the team. everybody that we have brought in, and people will say I'm talking shit, like, but he didn't want Bruno Guimaraes or Isaac as well. He wasn't sold on those two players, like, So he had other targets that he wants to bring in, so they were very much the ones that he wanted weren't available, so we went with him, so that has to change, because if you only have X amount to spend, you have to stretch that a little bit further. It's grand for us to say hindsight, we should have brought in this player, that player, and the other, but I think every fan questioned the transfer window last summer, in the sense of, like, you're talking, you brought in 4 players, but I don't think we addressed any weaknesses in a sense, and everybody was saying, why didn't we stretch it further? So it's not kind of hindsight, it's just kind of wondering why we actually didn't do it a little bit more, and I think this summer they'll have to be a bit more flexible. They'll have to bring in more players from abroad to bring up that baseline.
And it's a good segue, because I have a couple of questions here on players that we did buy but we haven't seen in action yet. So we have a question in from Sean. Hopefully it's not Sean Bowes. He shouldn't be allowed to ask questions in here, Alan.
Don't worry.
We've got, or Sean Casey asking himself questions. But we have a question here from Sean saying we're losing games and the opposition offloads their bench in the 60-minute mark. We need numbers in the next 2 windows. But specifically refers to Minta. So it's Yakuba Minta and Garan Kual should be on the bench next season. And then I have another question here from Mary that says any possibility of Minta being in the squad next season. I suppose I'll tie them together, Sean, and say, like, we have players there that aren't with us this season, but do we expect to see them next season? And can they be considered as new signings, really?
But people scream from this rooftop, so Minty, I don't think Cool is going to make it, to be honest with you. But Minty, so there was a lot of interest in the championship for Minty, and this is why I rule out kind of all Dutch players when they're linked from the Eredivisie, like Bakayoko and own players like that. Is Newcastle decided to send him to Holland because they thought the Dutch league was actually easier than the championship. The thing about him, if you watch him play, honestly, I'd say if there wasn't a stadium in the way, he'd probably run off the pitch with the ball and he'd just keep on going. There's a bit of a Forrest Gump about him. Yeah. He is incredible. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, he will be sensational for Newcastle, like, because he has an absolutely unique skill set. Like, he runs the same speed off both feet. Like, so if he has a starting position on his left or right foot, he is exactly the same speed, and he's probably quicker with the ball. Like, he carries the ball under his hips. He's running with it. Very few players can actually carry the ball like that. Alexander Kleb, very similar, carry the ball under his hips like that. Impossible to challenge him. Same with Foden and stuff like that. He has that about him, but he needs to get his head up and learn when to release the ball. And that's why he's at Feyenoord at the moment. So I think he could either stay there for another season or go to the championship next season. But they want to put a bit more weight on him and just trying to bring up his decision making before they do actually send him to the championship. But players that are breaking in, it's funny because like I had somebody recently that said that a lot of people are banging on about Lewis Hall on Twitter and stuff like that, saying they should be starting, but people at the training ground believe Murphy's a better defender. So how close is he? So I think Murphy is probably the closest, I'd say, to breaking in or getting a nice championship loan next season, because he's meant to be getting on really, really well. But yeah, so I think that's it from players that we haven't seen. And Lewis Hall, I just think it's the defensive side of his game that needs to change. Like, you will see that he actually happened a few times against Anthony and happens a few times at Bournemouth as well. He gets touch tight and he doesn't turn. Like, he's very quick in a straight line, but his ability to turn and sprint is a little bit delayed. That's where you would have seen him is Zaben. I forget your man's name for Bournemouth, but he'd done him a few times, And the same with Anthony, he gets too tight, and once he's spun, he finds it very hard to turn off. Same happens with Levi Cowell as well. If you watch him at Chelsea, phenomenal player, but if he gets turned, his initial sprint is very, very slow. Quick player, but those initial 5 or 6 yards, which makes you elite. Does he have them? But yeah. So I don't think we have anybody that's going to impact the team for the rest of the season, being honest with you.
I genuinely wasn't expecting Alexander Kleb's name to be brought into this show as well, Sean. So thank you.
I absolutely. My brother is a massive Arsenal fan, and I've seen him play live, and I watched a few Arsenal games with my brother and stuff like that, and I just thought he was like, I don't know. I watch football and I just watch it. I suppose I just watch certain things and certain aspects of players and stuff like that make them unique, and I'm like, fuck me, man, what a player! Like, that move to Barcelona was crazy, but like, he was one of the most naturally gifted people I've ever seen run with a football. watch back on his highlights and stuff like that. Like when you talk with hips over the ball and stuff like that, if a player runs with his hips over the ball, you can't tackle him. You know, he was just unbelievable. Like, and yeah, I would want to be saying too much about like an Arsenal like a slaughter.
Don't worry, Chriso gets enough of it for admitting he was a closet Man Red fan back in the day.
Yeah.
I was a Blackburn fan.
In the past now, Chriso.
I actually supported Blackburn.
There's a scoop.
There's a scoop. Then up, yeah. I was a massive Blackburn fan because my brothers used to so he used to play tournaments when we were younger and stuff like that. Like, and fucking I was scoring goals for fun, like, and he was calling me Shawnee Shearer. So he was playing for Blackburn at the time, so I followed Blackburn. And then when he left Blackburn and joined Newcastle, I started to follow Newcastle. So my friends used to slag me on Twitter all the time about being a Blackburn fan. And people picked up on that, and that's where this thing comes from, that he's not even a Newcastle fan and this, that, and the other. So, yeah, I was a Blackburn fan up until Shearer left. I'm a Shearer fan, and that just kind of transcended into being a Newcastle fan.
I was going to say, lucky for you and for us and for everyone that Shearer never actually left Newcastle, so you're still a Newcastle fan.
I thought you were going to say lucky for us and lucky for everybody that I became a Newcastle fan. Shearer left Blackburn. That's a compliment and a half. No more payment needed.
And there'll be a bit of crack to come with that FA Cup fifth round draw, assuming Blackburn do overcome Wrexham. But again, time will tell. Right, we'll do a quick fire round. We have a few more questions I want to fly through, and then we'll jump into we'll make our way towards the outro. So, quick fire questions for you, Sean. I've got one here from Punter 9957183. Any more young Irish players being watched which could come in? Sorry, I'll put that up on the screen. And there was another question from Paul Slaughter about Reece Byrne, who's already on our books, I believe, right? The goalkeeper. Yeah, so anyone doing the rounds?
Nothing really. Do you know what? I don't think they've cracked the Irish market. You know, I think they're going to find it very hard to do it. I think it's sewn up at the moment. You know, so nothing at the moment, nothing that I've heard anyway. They were linked with what's that chap there? He went to Sheffield United.
Sam Curtis.
Sam Curtis.
Yeah. They've looked at him, and there's another young fella as well. I'll murder his name now. I think he's a left winger. He's only 17. He was on trial at Man City, and we've trying to get him up for a trial as well. His name evades me at the moment. I think it could be Rovers or something like that he plays. I think he's only 17. He's one of the youngest players to play in the Aircom League. But they've looked at him as well. But yeah, that's it really. Nothing really. I think they might get one or two young players in before the window closes. All right.
Interesting. And I suppose there's another question here from Dave Bullman then. If we had to sell one of our top players to help kind of build squad and for FFP reasons, who would you go with?
Based on the circumstances and with the year left on the contract, you'd say Joelinton. You're talking, if it's Bruno Guimaraes, you can't replace him because his skill set is unique. You find me a player that is as press resistant as him. I don't think they're available. Rocco Reece at Mönchengladbach is probably the closest I've seen in European football over the last year or so to actually being that press resistant. Bruno Guimaraes, he'll receive the ball off the centre backs every time. He'll take the ball under pressure. Having somebody that will take the ball under pressure consistently and that would prefer to lose the ball themselves instead of giving a hospital pass and put somebody else under pressure is a unique skill set. So replacing him is going to be tough. I think we'll actually probably have to change the system when Guimaraes goes. Isaac, again, you're talking 67 million we paid from. There's 2 years only taken off the books from. So for financial fair play, if you're selling him and replacing him, you're still paying for him and trying to replace him at the same time. So it's counterproductive. You know, it just doesn't happen. But again, the man's name is a unicorn for a reason. We just need to get the supply line to him a little bit better. But yeah, that's why I don't think we'll sign Sesko in the summer. You know, I would have said it way back. You know, I would have been the first one to link Sesko to Newcastle, and it was a case of it's either Sesko or Isaac because they have a similar profile. And I think you will see a lot of leaks to Newcastle to Sesko because they're probably trying to cover over watching Ospenda, who also plays for Leipzig, who they're very, very keen on.
Yeah.
That'll be some sign, and he's unreal. He is.
And the other one, was a question from me, Sean, because I get to, seeing as I'm the host. We spent a lot of time talking about Guirassy on this show over the last few weeks, and he's apparently, quite a reasonable release clause. But again, that seems to have died down. Is that something to behind us?
There's nothing about this club that tells me that they're going to react to a one-season wonder. You know, I mean that's what it is very much. Like you're talking 15 million is fair enough, but then you're talking the wages as well. And there was a lot of interest from Saudi in him, so he'll get a big Saudi move in the summer where he's going to probably be on about 500 grand a week. You know, so like for us to win from, I think they wanted nearly 200 grand or something like that on top of the 15 million wage, and he didn't want to sign a long-term contract either. So yeah, I think it was, there's two things. There's the players you chase, and there's the players that the club chase, and there's the players that chase the club. And he's one of these players that is intermediaries. They chase the club.
Yeah, right.
Fair. Right. We're nearly at the end, Sean. You can almost exhale. I actually don't. I'm going to put you under pressure. David Walsh has asked us, can we ask you what level you played at yourself? Must have been a decent level, because the way you see the game, and obviously getting coached very well. So
I played for Rockmount in Cork City, if you ever heard of them. So I would have played for them underage. I was average, but I played for probably one of the best teams to ever play in Cork City. Absolutely incredible players. Paul Slaughter will know one of them there, a fella Greg Toomey. We played Leicester out in the Mardyke, I think it was, and Darren O'Day was on trial at the time with Leicester, and Greg fucking skinned him, absolutely ran him ragged. I think Aidan McGeady was on trial as well at the time. So I played for one of the best teams that would ever come out of Cork, I'd say, but I was average myself. I just love the game, love tactics, love watching. I just seen games in a different light. When I was younger, I would have played a lot of Football Manager. After my leaving cert results, I stopped. I think it was for the good of everybody. I stopped playing Football Manager at about 17, 18. But obsessed with football, just watching football. I'd, pre-having kids, would watch it non-stop, and then pre-getting married as well and stuff like that. I would have just... I've always analysed football, so I suppose my qualifications as in professionally, I would have been like a statistical management and stuff like that. So we're talking green belt, black belt, and stuff like that. So understanding stats and how to analyse things comes from my work, I suppose, and what I would have done educationally. And now I can add that to my understanding of football as well. So that's why I probably see things the way I see things. So you have people that never played football, but they can read out stats well. They can't correlate both. Whereas I've played football, I'm obsessed with sports. I've trained 7 nights a week, so it's not just playing football, it's understanding the athletic side of things as well, because I train every single day non-stop. So I understand probably kind of the three key aspects of football, as in this playing football, the athleticism, and understanding the statistical side of it, as well as in formations and how would all the analytics come into play.
Yeah, look, it's definitely coming through. Obviously, sitting here talking to you, Sean, most of us will know you from the Irish Mags community through the WhatsApp group, and obviously all the information you put on Twitter. But it is nice to hear you speak about football and transfers. We've Easy Slim echoing that in the comments here as well. First time hearing Sean Casey talk. I've followed him on Twitter for a while, but top stuff, knowledge, analysis, needs more shows or airtime. There you go, Sean. Now you have no excuse to get back on this show again in a few weeks' time. Lovely, lads. I've got one last question, because it's just caught my eye. It's the last question before we wrap up. And it says, from DUP95, yes or no, do we break our transfer record in the summer? And I'll go around to the three of you, lads. Yes or no? So the current record, did we say it's 67?
67.
For Isaac, right? So, Alan, I'll come to you first. Do you think we'll break that in the summer? Yes or no?
Yes, but on the grounds that we get 50 or 60 million in for players.
Interesting. Krisho.
Yeah, sorry, I just got off the phone with Steve Nixon. No, because we're going to use all the money to replace anyhow. So yeah, there you go. No.
Okay, Sean.
I hope not, because I want them to stretch the budget. I want them to be a bit more efficient in the market and kind of not overspend for pleasing fans, and kind of look at building out the squad a little bit more. So I hope that we don't. I don't think there's a need to do it. There's so much available on the market, and there's so much available to them that they can pull in these players. So I hope that we build out the squad a little bit more, so that we can create a little bit more tactical flexibility. So no, I'm saying definitely not. I would think it would be, there's no point in having an elite recruitment system and talking about all these players being all these people being fantastic at what they do and building it up so much and not using it. I would like to see us, I prefer for us to actually box clever in the transfer market, rather than spending these huge money on players, because there's just no need for it. There's so much talent out there at the moment, so I'd like to see them stretch the budget. I think probably what we will see, dovetailing off a little bit from it, I suppose, is we'll probably see a lot of noise come out about the stadium over the next couple of weeks. you know, so I think it'll be very much, and you'll see it kind of go to fans groups, and you'll probably see a lot of like influencers and stuff like that talk about it. They'll look at the stadium revamp as it is, because they probably won't get enough. They won't be able to extend the stadium enough to actually make it, they say, 70,000 stadium. So they'll talk about either refurbing the stadium or moving stadium and moving totally. You know, the meetings during the week there that I invited the lads to there up in Alnwick.
Incidentally, Sean, we have a question in that we nearly missed it, but we never would have let you go.
I'm actually
Joelinton himself has turned up in chat here for you as well, by the way. There's Joelinton.
I'm actually kind of insulted that people thought that I was invited, that it wasn't me that invited them. But anyway, so I think it's centered really around, I think we're going to hear a lot of news on the training ground. So they have 3 sites around Newcastle. It's hard to actually nail down that information because the Rubens own a lot of land up around Newcastle and stuff as well. But they had 3 sites kind of up about 2-3 weeks ago, and they're told they've settled on one, and they will kind of start announcing that soon. Probably over the next couple of weeks, and it's probably, they went through basically the pros and cons, because they've been gathering this information for the past few months of moving stadium, right, versus actually staying at the stadium, refurbing it and stuff like that. The problem is, and what you have to think of it is, if I say, lads, come to St. James's Park, ticket is what, 45-50 euros, say, for example, just use a ballpoint figure, next season you're paying 100. Fans say, what the fuck, we're being ripped off. And now I say to you, lads, you're coming to the Adidas Bowl, you know, or whatever you want to call it, gives 120 euros. They're going to say, wow, you can electronic scan in and the points pour themselves and all this kind of stuff. You don't even factor in the money, you know, so there's a bit of that at play as well. So, like, to increase revenue, you have to build a new stadium, you know, and I hate this fucking line that's coming out. You know, you can love the owners and love what they do to the club, but you can also have, not criticize, but you can also query things as well. It's the thing of, and the message that's probably going to be put out over the next few weeks is that if we move to a new stadium, it's going to be free. PIF are going to build it. It's not going to cost you anything. Fair enough. It's not going to cost the club anything. Fair enough. But the likes of us, we're going to be charged 60% extra on every ticket. So we do pay.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Mindful of that, you know. So my honest opinion is I think they'll move stadium, you know, because it makes sense from a revenue stream. You can't increase the tickets at St. James's Park because there'll be anarchy. And it's probably one of your best ways of revenue, you know. Cheap win, like, you know. So I think they will move stadium. I'd be absolutely gutted. I'm already falling out of love of football as it is, money wise, as when I talk about top level football, as in Premier League football. I'm falling out of love of football, but if they move stadium, I'd be gutted, being honest with you. You know, I love, you know, I love walking up the back steps, and like it's just kind of a bit run down and dirty and grubby and stuff like that. Like, I hate these new modern stadiums. I just think there's a love for football at Newcastle that is just different than water. I never forget, I was at Fulham. Last story. I love to talk, don't you? It's an Irish podcast.
No panic.
Yeah.
I can remember I was at Fulham, and I think it was what's the young for Sessignon got a hat trick, I think it was at the time. And I was there and I was sitting next to an old fella, and I was like, we were 2-1 down. I was getting up. I was like, I can't stick this shit anymore. You know, I'm not coming over anymore, wherever that. Because I told him my story previous, and he was like, everything will leave you in life except for your football club. He was like, I'm 83 years of age. He said, I've loved and I've lost. I've had 2 wives, you know, kids that don't talk to me anymore. But I always have this seat in the stand that will be there for me for the rest of my life. I was like, fuck me, man. That's actually what a football club means to someone. You know?
Yeah.
When you take St. James's Park away from us, you know, it's just, I don't know, I'd be emotional about it, being honest with you, because like, I love that ground. I hate going to the likes of Spurs and City and Arsenal, all this kind of stuff. It's just dead. There's no history there. You know, when you go to Newcastle, and when you go to the Kop and places like that, like, you know, it's just different. Like, you know, I lived in Germany for a while as well, like, you know, and like you go to Cologne, I lived in Cologne for a while, and you go to the stadium there and stuff like that, man, it's just so rich in culture. You go to a new stadium, you lose the culture, you know, and you get a different type of fan base then as well, like, you know. And
it almost connects like past and present, right? To the stadium history, and just, you know, it's the people that carry it through it. So I think a lot of people would definitely be devastated if it did move, but it's a realistic prospect, I suppose, is the way we're gonna have to
I think
handle it. Yeah. But we're glad to hear you had a good time at Alnwick Castle anyway.
Great time.
the next time you're there, we'll get you on again to give us the lowdown. But look,
what I'm going to do the next time is I'll actually do the podcast from there. That's okay.
That would be really
Depends,
appreciated.
doesn't it?
That'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
I'm sure there's ways to get a fake background behind you, but no, we'd never talk.
I've never faked anything in my life.
Oh, he got it in there. He got it right in there. Hello, Steve. Hello, Steve.
It's okay, lads. We're after hours now. We're past the watershed. Right, but look, I think, lads, we've got through a hell of a lot of content questions. Sean, thanks again for giving us your time. There's a lot going on there, and I suppose all we can do is really speculate. The short-term impatient part of us all knows there's 3 days left in the window. Let's see what happens. But obviously, there's a lot more and a lot more longer-term thinking to go by. We won't have a bad take of the week this week because we've had a lot of takes there. And Chriso, that means you're gonna have to make it extra special for next week. It will be. And I have no doubt. That it will. But Alan, I want to come to you very quickly because you are our Irish Mags chief correspondent. There is another meetup to be had. Am I right?
There is indeed. Naturally, we're playing Villa on Tuesday night, so we kick off 7 o'clock. I think 7 or 8 o'clock. I'm useless. Don't worry about that. I'll be there from 6 o'clock, so don't worry about that with all the flags up. So anyone who's in and around Dublin, anytime, pop in to Bleecker Street Bar, and you will be welcomed with a pint.
Super stuff. Thank you for
and
that,
lads,
Alan. And
I'm going to run. I appreciate it. Thanks, Paul, for holding the fort. And again, I'll be on again loads. It's when I can make the time, I'll let you know and stuff like that. And pre-wires to the transfer window, and we'll talk tactics and all this kind of stuff. But I appreciate having you on. Great stuff, and best of luck in the future.
We'll definitely get you on. We'll definitely get you on again, Sean. And for any of you who haven't got him already, lads, look up Sean on Twitter. It's Sean. You want to shout it out? Oh, we've lost him. I believe it's at Sean. We've just lost Sean there. He had to dip. It's at Sean Casey 51, I believe, is where we're going there, lads. So obviously check him out. All the links to our own socials are below wherever you're looking at on Twitch or on YouTube. So please make sure to drop us a like, a follow, a subscribe. And a reminder, this podcast, which will be released in audio form during the week on Wednesday, is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcast. One more time, guys, I want to thank everyone who's listening to the live show today. This is our first live show, lads, and we've got through it. So I think we should all be very proud of ourselves, Alan and Chris. Thank you to everyone who's asked all the great questions. I think we got some really nice insights from Sean. Obviously, he gets a lot of grief and abuse for all of the ITK stuff and all the transfers. But when you actually start to peel back some of that, and talk about the club, talk about the football, talk about what we need, hugely insightful. So we look forward to having him on again soon. And one last piece of news, which is a bit of a work in progress. We mentioned that the January transfer window is closed in 3 days. We're hoping to actually have a little bit of a live show on the evening of the 31st, i.e. the evening the window closes. I believe it's 11 p.m. on Wednesday that it closes. So we hope to be live. And I think it may rely a little bit on, are we actually going to do any deals on that day? So if we have a sniff of anything, and we'll be keeping close to Sean on this one, lads, you might just see us live on that Wednesday. So until then, I think all that's left for me to do is say thank you, Alan, for coming on again this week.
Thanks for having me as usual.
And Chriso, thank you very much for joining. We know you're busy.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, guys. Honestly, it's my pleasure. I've just got to get on to Steve Nixon after this because I believe Joelinton's going to sign for Juventus on Wednesday night.
Oh dear.
For £37 million. And I got that in there. I let Sean talk there, see that? But I didn't say it. So there you go. There's a scoop for Wednesday night.
We won't bring up the scoops you've had before. I mean, we still need to talk about Joachim Anderson. He still hasn't joined, and you told us to be in on the 3rd of January, but that's coming for another day. Right. Stay tuned on the socials for more details on all of that. In the meantime, though, all I'll say is thank you very much for dialing in, listening in. How are the lads? Slán Gufall, and of course, see you all very soon. Take care and goodbye. We shall wrap that up until next week.